A homeless mother of 3 spent her last $950 on a condemned Victorian mansion. Everyone said would kill her, but hidden inside its crumbling walls was $256 million that would change everything. Before we explore this incredible journey, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The dashboard clock in the 2008 Honda Civic read 3:47 in the morning when Rebecca stirred awake, her neck stiff from sleeping upright in the driver's seat. Outside, the parking lot of the 24-hour grocery store sat empty, except for 2 other cars, both occupied by people just like her people who had nowhere else to go. In the back seat, her 3 children slept tangled together under a donated comforter that smelled like someone else's laundry detergent. Michael, age 9, had his arm protectively wrapped around his younger sisters. Sophie, 7, clutched a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. And Emma, just 5 years old, sucked her thumb, something she hadn't done in 2 years, until they lost the apartment 3 months ago. Rebecca rubbed her eyes and checked her phone. The screen was cracked in the corner, a spider web of broken glass that had been there since she dropped it, rushing out of the motel they could no longer afford. Battery at 11%. No messages, no missed calls, just the crushing weight of another morning, with nowhere to go and nothing left to give. She opened her bank app, even though she knew what it would say. $473.18. That was it. That was everything, standing between her family and complete collapse. The rent on their old apartment had been $1,200 a month, which she couldn't make after losing her job at the medical billing office when they downsized. The motels they bounced between cost $60 a night, eating through her savings like acid. And now, here they were, sleeping in a car in November, the Pennsylvania cold seeping through the windows, no matter how many blankets they piled on. She'd applied to 42 jobs in the last month. Retail, food service, cleaning, anything. But every application asked for an address, a phone number that stayed on, references from the job she'd been let go from. And even when she got interviews, she had to figure out childcare, which cost money she didn't have, or bring the kids along, which meant she didn't get the job. It was a loop with no exit, a trap with no key. She thought about her parents, both gone now. Her father 5 years ago to cancer, her mother just last year to a stroke. No siblings, no family left to call. The kid's father had disappeared when Emma was still in diapers, leaving nothing but a broken lease and a phone number that went straight to a robotic voice telling her the mailbox was full. Rebecca was 32 years old, and she felt like she was drowning in slow motion, watching herself sink deeper every single day. Michael shifted in the back seat, his eyes opening just a crack. "Mom?" he whispered. "Go back to sleep, baby," she said softly. "It's still early. Are we gonna find a house today?" She swallowed hard. "We're trying, honey, I promise." He nodded and closed his eyes again, believing her because that's what children do. They believe their mothers can fix everything, even when their mothers know the truth. At 6:30 in the morning, Rebecca drove the kids to the public library as soon as it opened. It was warm inside, had bathrooms they could use, and free Wi-Fi she desperately needed. She set the girls up in the children's section with picture books, while Michael did homework on the floor, his backpack serving as a desk. The librarian, a kind woman named Patricia, with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, had stopped asking questions 2 weeks ago and just started leaving snacks near where they sat. Crackers, granola, bars. Once, a brown bag with sandwiches inside and a note that said, "For later." Rebecca cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes after finding that bag. She opened her laptop, a 6-year-old machine that took 5 minutes to boot up, and started her daily routine. Job sites, apartment listings, resources for homeless families. Everything required money she didn't have, or waiting lists that stretched for months. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, exhausted, defeated, ready to close the computer and give up for the day. That's when she saw it. A listing so absurd, so ridiculous, it almost didn't seem real. Victorian mansion, foreclosure auction, starting bid, $950. She clicked on it, convinced it was a scam, but the listing was legitimate, posted by the county tax office. The house was located in Ashford, a small town about 40 minutes north. The description was blunt: property sold as is, condemned structure, no inspections, no warranties, buyer responsible for all repairs, liens, and back taxes, cash only. The photos were haunting. A massive 3-story Victorian house with peeling paint, broken windows, and a roof that sagged in the middle like a swayback horse. The porch had collapsed on one side. Vines crawled up the walls like veins. The yard was overgrown with weeds taller than a person. It looked like something out of a horror movie, the kind of place teenagers dared each other to enter on Halloween. But it was a house, 4 walls and a roof, and the starting bid was $950. Rebecca stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had $473 in her account. If she could scrape together another $500, maybe borrow it, beg for it, sell something, she could bid, she could try. It was insane. Completely insane. The house was condemned, which meant it wasn't safe to live in. It probably had structural damage, mold, electrical issues, plumbing problems, maybe even asbestos. The back taxes alone could be thousands. But what other choice did she have? She looked over at her children. Michael was helping Sophie sound out words in a book. Emma had fallen asleep on a beanbag chair, her tiny body curled up like a kitten. They deserved better than this. Better than sleeping in a car. Better than washing their faces in library bathrooms. Better than pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. Rebecca took a shaky breath and clicked on the auction details. The sale was happening in 2 days, Wednesday at 10 in the morning, at the county courthouse. She had 48 hours to come up with $500 more. She spent the rest of that day doing something she swore she'd never do. She called everyone she'd ever known and asked for money. Old co-workers, former friends who'd drifted away, a cousin she hadn't spoken to in 8 years. Most didn't answer. A few gave excuses. But 3 people said yes. A woman from her old church sent $50 via an app. Her former manager, who'd felt guilty about the layoff, sent $200. And Patricia, the librarian, handed her an envelope as they were leaving that evening with $250 cash inside, and a note that said, "For the house. Pay me back when you can." Rebecca cried again, this time in the parking lot, clutching that envelope like it was made of gold. Wednesday morning arrived cold and gray. Rebecca dressed the kids in their nicest clothes, which weren't very nice anymore, and drove to the Ashford County Courthouse. The building was old, made of limestone blocks that had gone gray with age, with tall windows and wooden doors that creaked when you opened them. Inside, the auction room smelled like dust and old paper. There were maybe 15 people there, most of them men in work boots and flannel, contractors probably, looking for cheap projects to flip. A few older couples sat in the back, whispering to each other. And then there was Rebecca, standing near the front with her 3 kids, all of them silent and wide-eyed. The auctioneer was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a thick mustache and a voice that boomed off the walls. He went through the preliminaries quickly, reading off the property address, the legal description, the liens, the back taxes, the disclaimers. "This property is sold in as-is condition," he repeated. "The county makes no guarantees regarding habitability, safety, or structural integrity. All sales are final." Then he looked up. "Starting bid is $950. Do I have $950? Rebecca's hand shot up before she could talk herself out of it. $950, the auctioneer said, pointing at her. "Do I have 1,000? A man in a Carhartt jacket raised his hand. 1,000. "Do I have 1,100? Another hand. 1,100. Do I have 12? Rebecca's heart sank. She only had 950. She couldn't go higher. But then the auctioneer paused. 1,200. Silence. The man in the Carhartt jacket shook his head and sat down. The other bidder looked at a woman beside him, and she shook her head too. Going once at 1,100, the auctioneer said. Going twice. Rebecca's mind raced. She stepped forward. Excuse me, she said, her voice shaking. Can I bid again? The auctioneer looked at her, surprised. You were at 950, ma'am. Current bid is 1,100. Can you go higher? What if the other bidders drop out? She asked. Can it go back to my bid? He frowned. That's not how auctions work. But then the woman next to the last bidder stood up. Actually, we're out, she said. We just got a text. Another property came through. The auctioneer blinked. You're withdrawing your bid? Yes, sir. He looked around the room. Anyone else? Silence. He looked back at Rebecca. Then we're back to $950. Going once. Going twice. He slammed the gavel down. Sold. Rebecca's knees almost gave out. She'd just bought a house. A condemned, broken, barely standing house. But a house. The paperwork took an hour. She signed form after form, her hand shaking the entire time. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses, explained the back taxes. $4,200, due within 6 months, or the property would go back to the county. Rebecca nodded, even though she had no idea how she'd come up with that money. But that was a problem for later. Right now, she had a roof. The clerk handed her a set of keys on a tarnished brass ring. Good luck, she said, and something in her tone made it sound like Rebecca was going to need it. The drive to the house took 20 minutes. Rebecca followed the GPS through downtown Ashford, a place that had clearly seen better days. Boarded-up storefronts, a diner with half its sign missing, empty sidewalks, the kind of town where the factory closed and never reopened. The houses got older and farther apart as they drove, until, finally, the GPS said, "You have arrived." Rebecca pulled over and stared. The photos hadn't done it justice. The house was enormous, 3 full stories, plus an attic, with towers on each corner and a wraparound porch that had partially rotted away. The windows were dark and empty like dead eyes, paint peeled in long strips, revealing grey wood underneath. The yard was a jungle of dead weeds, thorns, and cracked cement walkways disappearing into the overgrowth. A wrought iron fence surrounded the property, leaning in places, missing posts in others. And above the front door, barely visible under years of grime, was the number, 1873. The year the house was built, 152 years old. Is that ours? Michael asked from the back seat, his voice small. Yes, baby, Rebecca said. That's ours. It looks scary, Sophie whispered. It looks like an adventure, Rebecca said, forcing a smile. She didn't believe it, but she needed them to. They got out of the car, slowly, the cold wind cutting through their jackets. Rebecca unlocked the front gate, which groaned on rusted hinges, and led her children up the walkway. The porch steps creaked under her weight, some of them sagging dangerously. She tested each one before letting the kids follow. The front door was massive, made of dark wood with an oval window of stained glass, cracked and missing pieces. Rebecca slid the key into the lock. It stuck at first, then turned with a heavy clunk. She pushed the door open. It groaned like something alive. Inside was darkness. The smell hit her first. Mildew, rot, dust, and something else. Something old and stale. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a grand entryway with a staircase that curved up to the second floor. The banister was ornate, carved from dark wood, but half of it was broken. The wallpaper hung in tatters. The chandelier overhead was covered in cobwebs and missing crystals. The paned floor was hardwood, warped and buckled in places. Stay close to me, Rebecca said. They stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under their feet. To the left was a sitting room with a collapsed ceiling, plaster and beams scattered across the floor. To the right was a parlor with shattered windows and leaves piled in the corners. Straight ahead, past the staircase, was a hallway leading to what might have been a kitchen. Michael walked to the staircase and looked up. "Mom, there's like 100 rooms in here." "Maybe not 100, Rebecca said, "but a lot." Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Can we stay here tonight?" Rebecca looked around at the wreckage. The danger, the impossibility of it all. "We're going to try, sweetheart." They spent the rest of the day exploring. Most of the rooms were empty, stripped long ago of anything valuable. But the bones of the house were incredible. Fireplaces in nearly every room, crown molding, pocket doors, stained glass, intricate woodwork. It had been a mansion once, a place where someone with money and taste had lived. Now, it was a carcass. They found a room on the first floor, a small den with a fireplace and fewer broken windows than the others. Rebecca swept out the debris as best she could, using a broom she found in a closet. She laid down the donated blankets and sleeping bags they'd been using in the car. It wasn't much, but it was inside. It was theirs. That night, they huddled together in that room, the fireplace dark, because Rebecca didn't trust the chimney. The house made sounds, constant sounds, creaking, settling, the wind moving through broken windows, scratching noises in the walls. The kids pressed close to her. "Mom?" Sophie whispered. "Are there ghosts here?" "No, baby," Rebecca said. "Just old wood and wind." But she didn't really believe that either. The house felt alive, watching, waiting. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through a crack in the boards over the window. She stretched, her back aching from sleeping on the floor, and looked around. In the daylight, the house seemed less terrifying and more tragic. Someone had loved this place once. Someone had built it with care. She could see it in the details. The hand-carved flowers on the mantel, the stained glass roses in the window, the way the staircase curved like a sculpture. This house had been beautiful. It could be again, maybe, if she could figure out how. She spent that day walking through every room, taking notes on her phone. There were 12 rooms on the first floor, 14 on the second, 6 in the attic, 40 windows, half of them broken, 3 chimneys, 2 staircases, a basement she hadn't worked up the courage to enter yet, and everywhere, strange details, doors that led to nowhere, closets with false backs, a second staircase hidden behind a panel in the wall, rooms that didn't line up with the outside dimensions of the house. It was like the house had been built with secrets in mind. In the library, a room on the second floor with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, she found something odd. One section of shelves didn't quite sit flush with the wall. She pressed on it, and it shifted. Her heart jumped. She pressed harder, and the entire section swung inward on hidden hinges. Behind it was a narrow passageway, dark and cold. Rebecca pulled out her phone and shined the light inside. The passage ran behind the walls, with openings at intervals, like someone could move through the house unseen. At the end of the passage was a small room, no bigger than a closet, and inside that room was a metal box, rusted and locked. She dragged the box out into the library and stared at it. It was heavy, maybe 30 pounds. No markings, just a keyhole. She tried to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. One of the keys from the brass ring the clerk had given her. She tried each one. The 5th key slid in, turned, clicked. The box opened. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Old, yellowed, fragile. Letters written in careful script. Legal documents, deeds, photographs of people in Victorian era, clothing, standing in front of this very house. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was something small and heavy. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a locket, gold, with an intricate design on the front. She opened it. Inside was a photograph of a woman and a child. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, "For Margaret, forever protected." Rebecca sat back, her mind racing. Who was Margaret? Who had hidden this box? And why? She looked around the library, at the hidden passage, at the house, full of secrets. This place was more than it seemed, much more. And she was just beginning to understand that buying this house for $950 might have been the most dangerous, the most desperate, and the most important thing she'd ever done. Because something was hidden here, something big, and whether she wanted to or not, she was about to find out what. The first week in, the house felt like living inside a puzzle that was slowly trying to kill them. Rebecca woke each morning to new problems. A pipe that burst in the night, flooding the kitchen floor. A section of ceiling in the upstairs hallway that collapsed, sending plaster raining down like snow. The furnace that didn't work at all, leaving them shivering under every blanket they owned. She'd bought a house for $950, and now she understood why. The temperature outside dropped to 28 degrees on the fifth night. Rebecca gathered the kids into the small den where they'd been sleeping and built a fire in the fireplace, praying the chimney wouldn't catch. She'd stuffed towels around the doors and windows to keep the heat in. Michael and Sophie sat close to the flames, their breath still visible in the air. Emma had started coughing, a wet sound that made Rebecca's chest tighten with worry. "Mom, I'm cold," Emma said, her voice small. "I know, baby. Come here." Rebecca pulled her daughter onto her lap and wrapped them both in a blanket. She rubbed Emma's back, feeling how thin she'd gotten over the past few months. They all had. "Tomorrow I'm going to see about getting us some space heaters," Rebecca said. "We just need to make it through tonight." But space heaters cost money, and money was something they didn't have. The next morning, Rebecca walked into town with the kids to find the local hardware store. Ashford wasn't much, just a main street with maybe 20 buildings still in business. She passed the post office, a bar called Lucky's, a laundromat, and finally found Jennings Hardware, tucked between a closed-down pharmacy and an insurance office. The bell above the door rang as they entered. Inside smelled like sawdust and motor oil. An older man with white hair and a flannel shirt looked up from behind the counter. "Help you?" he asked. "I need some space heaters," Rebecca said, "and maybe some plywood to board up some windows." He looked at her, then at the kids standing close to her legs. "You're the one who bought the Whitmore house." It wasn't a question. Rebecca nodded. "How'd you know?" "Small town. Word travels. That place has been sitting empty for near 20 years. He shook his head. "You got your work cut out for you. I'm realizing that," Rebecca said. "So, about those heaters." He showed her what he had. The cheapest ones were $45 each. She'd need at least 3 to keep the main rooms warm, plus plywood, nails, maybe some basic tools. She did the math in her head and felt her stomach drop. She had $230 left in her account. After buying what she needed, she'd have almost nothing. "I'll take 2 heaters," she said quietly, "and 1 sheet of plywood." The man rang her up, watching her count out cash with slow, careful movements. When she was done, he pushed a box of nails across the counter. "No charge for these," he said. "And if you need help with repairs, my nephew does. Handyman work. Reasonable rates." Rebecca nodded, grateful, but knowing she couldn't afford reasonable anything. "Thank you." As they left, she heard him say to someone else in the store, "That woman's either brave or crazy. That house should have been torn down years ago." The judgment didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca felt it everywhere. At the grocery store, where people stared at her kids' worn-out clothes and whispered. At the elementary school where she enrolled them, where the receptionist looked at their address and raised an eyebrow. "The Whitmore house," she said. "That place is condemned." "We're working on it," Rebecca said, forcing a smile. The receptionist didn't smile back. Michael came home from his first day of school quiet. "What's wrong?" Rebecca asked. He shrugged. "Nothing. Michael. He looked up at her, his eyes wet. Some kids said we live in a haunted house. They said it's gonna fall down and kill us. Rebecca pulled him close. It's not going to fall down. I promise. We're fixing it. But even as she said it, she wondered if she was lying. Because the truth was, she didn't know how to fix any of this. She wasn't a contractor or a carpenter or an electrician. She was a 32-year-old woman who used to process medical bills. And now she was supposed to restore a 152-year-old mansion with no money and no help. At night, after the kids were asleep, she sat in the library with the metal box she'd found. She went through the papers again and again, trying to make sense of them. Most were letters, written in the 1880s and 90s, discussing business matters she didn't understand. Shipments, investments, names of banks that probably didn't exist anymore. But one letter caught her attention. It was dated September 14, 1896, and it was addressed to someone named Margaret Whitmore. My dearest Margaret, it read, I write to you in haste. As circumstances have grown dire, the collection must be protected at all costs. I have taken measures to ensure its safety, measures that will not be understood until the proper time. Trust that what I have hidden will remain so until someone worthy discovers it. The keys are divided, the map is in pieces, and the truth lies where only the patient and the brave will find it. Yours in perpetuity, Edward. Rebecca read it 3 times. Collection. Hidden. Keys. Map. What collection? She thought about the hidden passage she'd found, the false backs of closets, the rooms that didn't line up. This house was full of hiding places. What if there were more? What if Edward Whitmore, whoever he was, had hidden something valuable inside these walls? She spent the next day searching. She started in the basement, a dark, damp space with a dirt floor and stone walls that wept with moisture. She found old canning jars, broken furniture, and a coal chute that hadn't been used in decades. Nothing. The attic was next. It was cramped, with a low ceiling and insulation that had rotted away. She found old trunks filled with moth-eaten clothes, a broken rocking horse, stacks of magazines from the 1940s. Still, nothing. But in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor, she noticed something strange. The room was large, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with a fireplace on one wall and tall windows on another. But when she measured the outside of the house and compared it to the inside dimensions, the room was 5 feet shorter than it should be. There was space missing. She walked around the room, tapping on walls, pressing on panels. Nothing moved. Then she noticed the fireplace. It was ornate, made of carved marble with a mantle that jutted out. She ran her fingers along the underside of the mantle and felt something, a small button, recessed into the stone. She pressed it. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder. A soft click echoed through the room. And then, slowly, a section of the wall beside the fireplace swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment about 3 feet wide and 8 feet tall. Rebecca's heart hammered. She grabbed her phone and shined the light inside. The compartment was lined with shelves, and on those shelves were paintings, not big ones, but small, framed works, maybe a dozen in all. She pulled one out carefully and brought it into the light. It was a portrait of a woman in a blue dress, seated in a garden. The style was old, classical, the kind of thing you'd see in a museum. In the corner, barely visible, was a signature. She couldn't make it out. She set it down and pulled out another. A landscape, rolling hills under a stormy sky. Another signature she didn't recognize. And another painting. And another. 12 in total. Rebecca sat on the floor, surrounded by them, her hands shaking. She didn't know anything about art, but she knew these weren't prints or copies. They were originals. The paint had texture. The frames were heavy, old, real wood and gold. Leaf. Who hides paintings inside a wall? People who don't want them found. People who have something to protect. She thought about the letter. The collection must be protected at all costs. Was this it? Was this the collection? She carefully carried the paintings downstairs and hid them in the den behind a false panel she'd discovered in the closet. She didn't know what to do with them yet, but instinct told her to keep them secret, at least until she understood what she had. The next day, a man showed up at the house. He was in his 60s, wearing a suit that looked expensive, with silver hair slicked back and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Rebecca answered the door, suspicious. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "My name is Richard Dalton. I'm a local real estate investor. I heard you recently purchased this property." "I did." "Well, I wanted to introduce myself and make you an offer." He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "I buy distressed properties, fix them up, and resell them. This house, as I'm sure you've noticed, needs a lot of work, far more than most people can handle." Rebecca crossed her arms. "I'm handling it," he chuckled. "I'm sure you're trying. But the reality is, a house like this requires significant capital, permits, inspections, contractors. It's a money pit. I'd like to save you the trouble and make you a fair offer. $20,000, cash. You walk away with a profit, and I take on the headache." $20,000. It was more money than Rebecca had seen in years. It could get them an apartment, food, stability. But something about the way he smiled, the way his eyes moved past her into the house, made her skin crawl. "How did you even know I bought this place?" she asked. "Like I said, I keep an eye on distressed properties. It's my business. I'm not interested in selling." His smile faded slightly. "Mrs.? Just Rebecca." "Rebecca. I understand you have children. 3, if I'm not mistaken. Living in a condemned house with children is dangerous. The county could get involved. Child services. You wouldn't want that." Rebecca's blood went cold. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," he said, raising his hands. "I'm simply pointing out the reality of your situation. This house isn't safe, and if something were to happen, if one of your kids got hurt." He let the sentence hang. "I think you should leave," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Think about my offer. I'll be in touch." He walked back to his car, a black sedan that looked too clean for Ashford, and drove away. Rebecca closed the door and locked it, her hands shaking. Who was that man, and why did he want this house so badly? That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Richard Dalton, about his too smooth voice and his veiled threats. She thought about the paintings hidden in the den. She thought about Edward Whitmore's letter. The collection must be protected at all costs. What if people knew about it? What if that's why the house had sat empty for 20 years? What if someone had been waiting for it to go to auction so they could buy it cheap, but she'd bought it instead? And now they wanted it back. The next week brought more problems. The water heater died completely, leaving them without hot water. A windstorm tore off part of the roof, and rain poured into the attic, soaking through to the second floor. Rebecca spent an entire day with buckets, catching drips, while the kids huddled in the den. She called contractors, but the estimates were insane. $8,000 to fix the roof, $5,000 for the water heater and plumbing, $3,000 for electrical work. She didn't have $800, let alone $8,000. She was drowning, and no one was coming to save her. But the kids, somehow, stayed hopeful. Michael started exploring the house like it was a castle, naming the rooms and making maps. Sophie found a garden in the backyard, overgrown and wild, and started pulling weeds, talking about planting flowers in the spring. And Emma, despite her cough, would sit in the library and pretend to read the old, damaged books left on the shelves. "Mom, when the house is fixed, can I have the tower room?" Emma asked one night. "Which tower room, baby?" "The one on the left, with the round window." Rebecca smiled, even though she wanted to cry. Yes. When it's fixed, you can have it. Promise? Promise. But privately, Rebecca didn't know if she could keep that promise. 2 days later, she found another hidden compartment. This one was in the dining room, behind a panel in the wainscoting. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the pages brittle and yellowed. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was the same as the letters. Edward Whitmore. The entries were dated from 1894 to 1898. Most were mundane: weather reports, business notes, family matters. But one entry, dated March 3rd, 1897, stopped her cold. "The collection is nearly complete," it read. 42 pieces in total, acquired over 2 decades from the finest houses of Europe. "I have taken great care to document each work, its origin, and its value. But I fear there are those who would see it seized, stolen, or destroyed. Margaret understands the danger. We have agreed to hide the collection within the house itself, using the passages and compartments I commissioned during construction. No one else knows. No one else must. When the time is right, the collection will be revealed, but only to someone who proves themselves worthy. Only to someone who cares for this house, as I have." Rebecca's hands shook as she read. 42 pieces. She'd found 12 paintings. Where were the other 30? She searched the dining room, pulling at panels, pressing on carvings. Nothing. She went back to the master bedroom and searched the hidden compartment again. Nothing. She checked every room she'd already been through. Still nothing. The house was keeping its secrets. That night, there was a knock on the door. Rebecca opened it to find a woman in her 50s, bundled in a wool coat, holding a casserole dish. "Hi," the woman said, smiling. "I'm Lorraine. I live a few streets over. Heard you moved into the Whitmore house." Rebecca blinked, surprised. Yeah, that's us. I wanted to bring you this." She held out the casserole, chicken and rice. "Figured you could use a hot meal." Rebecca took it, stunned. "Thank you. That's really kind." Lorraine glanced past her into the house. "Place looks rough. It's getting there. If you need help, there's a community board at the church. People post odd jobs, services, that kind of thing. Might find someone willing to work cheap or trade." Rebecca nodded. "I'll check it out. Thank you." Lorraine smiled again. "Welcome to Ashford. Don't let the gossips get to you. Most folks here are good people. Just takes time to prove yourself." She left, and Rebecca stood there holding the casserole, feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe not everyone was judging her. Maybe some people still believed in helping. The next morning, she went to the church. It was a small white building with a steeple and stained glass windows. Inside, the community board was covered in flyers: babysitting services, firewood for sale, a man offering to plow driveways, and at the bottom, a handwritten note: handyman for hire. Fair rates. No job too small. Call Tom. She called the number. A man answered, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Yeah? Hi. My name is Rebecca. I saw your flyer. I need help with some repairs." "What kind of repairs?" "Everything," she admitted. He was quiet for a moment. "Where's the property?" 1873 Whitmore Lane. Another pause. "The Whitmore house?" "Yeah. Lady, that place is a death trap. I know. But it's all I've got." He sighed. "I'll come take a look. No promises." He showed up that afternoon in a pickup truck that had seen better days. Tom was in his 40s, with a thick beard and hands like catcher's mitts. He walked through the house slowly, making notes, shaking his head. "This is bad," he said finally. "How bad?" "Foundation's cracked. Roof needs to be replaced, not patched. Electrical's a fire hazard. Plumbing's shot." Rebecca felt the tears coming. "How much to fix it?" He looked at her, then at the kids peeking around the corner. "More than you've got." "Then what do I do?" He scratched his beard. "I'll make you a deal. I'll do the critical stuff, the things that'll keep you safe. The rest, we'll figure out as we go. You pay me what you can, when you can. Why would you do that? He shrugged. My daughter's about her age. He nodded toward Emma. I'd want someone to help her if she needed it. Over the next 3 weeks, Tom became a fixture at the house. He fixed the roof enough to stop the leaks. He repaired the water heater. He replaced the worst of the wiring. Rebecca helped however she could, holding tools, cleaning up debris, learning as she went. And slowly, the house started to feel less like a trap and more like a home. But the mysteries didn't stop. She found more hidden compartments, one behind a mirror in the hallway, one under the floorboards in the library. Each one contained pieces of the puzzle, more letters, more keys, more paintings. By the end of the month, she'd found 31 pieces total, still 11 missing. And then one night, as she was putting the kids to bed, there was another knock at the door. She opened it to find Richard Dalton standing there again, his smile colder this time. Hello, Rebecca. I thought I'd check in. See if you'd reconsidered my offer. I told you, I'm not interested. Pity. He looked past her into the house. You know, there are rumors about this place. Old stories. About things hidden here. Rebecca's heart stopped. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. He stepped closer. I'll give you one more chance. $50,000. More than this dump is worth. Walk away now, and no one gets hurt. Get off my property. He stared at her, his eyes hard. You're making a mistake. He turned and walked away. But this time, Rebecca noticed something. He glanced at the library window on the second floor, like he was looking for something, like he knew. And suddenly, Rebecca understood. This wasn't about the house. It was about what was inside it. The collection. People knew, and they were coming for it. Whatever she'd found, whatever Edward Whitmore had hidden, it was worth more than she could imagine. And now, whether she was ready or not, she was in a fight to protect it. Rebecca spent the next 2 days barely sleeping, jumping at every sound, checking the locks on the doors and windows a dozen times each night. Richard Dalton's words echoed in her mind. There are rumors about this place. Old stories. About things hidden here. How much did he know? How many others were watching? She'd found 31 pieces of art so far, hidden throughout the house, in compartments she'd discovered by accident, or through careful study of Edward Whitmore's cryptic journal entries. Each time she found one, she moved it to the den, hiding everything behind the false panel in the closet. But the weight of the secret was crushing her. She couldn't tell anyone, couldn't ask for help, couldn't even research the paintings online, because she was terrified of leaving a digital trail that someone could follow. She was trapped in a Victorian mansion with 3 children, and a mystery that was growing more dangerous by the day. On Thursday morning, while the kids were at school, she was in the library trying to decipher another journal entry when she heard a vehicle pull up outside. Her stomach clenched. She went to the window and looked down. It wasn't Richard Dalton's black sedan. It was Tom's pickup truck, and he wasn't alone. A woman was with him, maybe 60 years old, with short gray hair and a professional-looking coat. Rebecca went downstairs and opened the door before they could knock. Tom stood on the porch, looking apologetic. Hey, Rebecca. Hope it's okay, I stopped by. This is my sister, Diane. She's in town visiting, and I was telling her about the restoration work we've been doing. She works in historic preservation. Thought she might have some advice. Diane stepped forward, extending her hand. Tom's been showing me pictures. This house is remarkable. 1873 construction. If I'm reading the architecture correctly, these kinds of Victorians are rare, especially in this condition. This condition? Rebecca said, managing a weak smile. You mean falling apart? I mean still standing, Diane said warmly. Most houses from this era were demolished decades ago. The fact that the bones are still solid is extraordinary. Would you mind if I took a look around? Just from a historical perspective. I promise I'm not here to tell you what you're doing wrong. Rebecca hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to keep everyone out, to protect the secret. But Tom had been nothing but kind, and his sister seemed genuine. "Okay," she said finally, "but it's still pretty rough in places." They walked through the first floor, slowly. Diane stopped frequently, running her hands along the woodwork, examining the carvings, taking pictures with her phone. "This is remarkable craftsmanship," she said. "The detail work alone would cost a fortune to replicate today. Do you know anything about the original owners?" "A little," Rebecca said carefully. "Edward and Margaret Whitmore. He built the house. That's about all I know." "I'd love to see the rest," Diane said. They went upstairs. Rebecca steered them away from the master bedroom, afraid Diane would notice the hidden compartment. Instead, she showed them the library, the sitting rooms, the tower rooms. Diane was enchanting, pointing out architectural features, explaining the history of Victorian design, talking about preservation grants that might be available. For the first time in weeks, Rebecca felt like someone understood what she was trying to save. And then, Diane noticed the paintings. Rebecca had been careless. She'd left 2 of them in the library, propped against the wall near the window where the light was good. She'd been studying them the night before, trying to make out the signatures, and had forgotten to put them back. Diane walked over to them, curious. "Are these original to the house?" she asked. Rebecca's mouth went dry. I think so. I found them in storage." Diane knelt down, adjusting her glasses, leaning in close. Her expression changed. The casual curiosity vanished, replaced by something intense, focused. She looked at the signature on the first painting, then at the brushwork, then at the frame. "Rebecca," she said quietly, "where exactly did you find these?" "In a closet," Rebecca lied. "Why?" Diane didn't answer. She pulled out her phone and took several pictures, zooming in on details. Then she stood up, her face pale. "Tom, can you give us a minute?" Tom looked confused but nodded. "Sure. I'll go check on that loose board in the hallway." He left. Diane waited until his footsteps faded, then turned to Rebecca. "I need you to be very honest with me right now. How many of these do you have?" Rebecca's heart pounded. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Diane's voice was gentle but firm. "I've spent 30 years studying American art history. I know what I'm looking at. This painting," she pointed to the portrait of the woman in the blue dress, "if it's authentic, and I believe it is worth somewhere between $3 and $5 million. The room tilted. Rebecca grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "That's impossible. The signature is partially obscured, but I'm almost certain it's a Cassatt, Mary Cassatt. She was an American Impressionist painter, one of the most important artists of the 19th century. Her works are in museums all over the world. But several of her pieces disappeared over 100 years ago. Collectors have been looking for them ever since." Rebecca couldn't breathe. $3 to $5 million for one painting, and she had 31. "This one," Diane continued, moving to the landscape, "could be a Hassam, Child Hassam, another American Impressionist. If I'm right, it's worth even more." She turned to Rebecca, her expression serious. "You need to tell me everything, right now, because if you have what I think you have, your life is about to change in ways you cannot possibly imagine. And if the wrong people find out before you're protected, you could lose everything. Or worse." Rebecca stood there, trembling, the weight of the secret finally too much to carry alone. And then, slowly, she told Diane everything. About the hidden compartments, about Edward Whitmore's journal, about the 31 paintings she'd found, about Richard Dalton and his threats, about the fear that had been eating her alive for weeks. Diane listened without interrupting. When Rebecca finished, Diane was quiet for a long moment. "Do you have the paintings somewhere safe?" she asked. "They're hidden. I need to see them. All of them." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. She led Diane downstairs to the den, and showed her the false panel. Together, they pulled out the paintings, laying them carefully on the floor. Diane went through them one by one, her hands shaking, her breathing shallow, portrait after portrait, landscape after landscape. Each one signed by names Rebecca didn't recognize, but Diane clearly did. When she reached the last one, Diane sat back on her heels and looked up at Rebecca with tears in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what this is?" she whispered. "You tell me," Rebecca said. "This is the Whitmore collection. It's been lost for over 120 years. Art historians thought it was destroyed or sold off piece by piece, but it wasn't. Edward Whitmore hid it. He hid it in the walls of his own house." She stood up, pacing, running her hands through her hair. "These paintings, Rebecca, these 31 paintings, based on what I'm seeing, and I'd need experts to confirm, but based on the signatures, the style, the provenance, I'd estimate the collection is worth somewhere between $80 and $100 million. Rebecca's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, her vision blurring. $100 million. It was an incomprehensible number, a number that didn't feel real. "But you said 31, Diane continued, her voice urgent. "Edward's journal mentioned 42 pieces. Where are the other 11? "I don't know," Rebecca said, her voice hollow. "I've searched everywhere. Then we keep searching, because if even half of those missing pieces are what I think they are, you're not looking at $100 million. You're looking at 200, maybe more." She knelt down in front of Rebecca, gripping her shoulders. "But here's what you need to understand. The moment this goes public, your life is over. Not in a bad way, necessarily, but in every way that matters. It's over. The media will descend on you. The government will get involved. Museums will make claims. The IRS will want their cut. Lawyers will come out of the woodwork. And people like Richard Dalton, people who've been circling this house for years, they're going to fight you for every single piece." "What do I do?" Rebecca asked, her voice breaking. Diane took a breath. "You get a lawyer, a very good one. You get an art appraiser, someone reputable who can authenticate the collection. You document everything, every painting, every compartment, every page of that journal, and then you decide what you want to do with it. But you have to move fast, because the moment someone else finds out, and they will, the clock starts ticking." Rebecca spent the rest of the day in a daze. Diane left, promising to make calls to people she trusted, people who could help. Tom came back in, oblivious to what had just happened, and finished fixing a loose section of railing. Rebecca went through the motions, nodding when he spoke, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. That night, after the kids were asleep, she sat in the library, with Edward Whitmore's journal open on her lap. She read through it again, more carefully this time, looking for clues about the missing 11 pieces. And then she found something she'd missed before. An entry from June 6, 1898. "The final pieces are secure," it read. "I have placed them where no casual searcher will find them. Only someone who truly understands the house, who sees it as I do, will uncover the last secret. The heart of the collection lies in the heart of the home, where warmth and light converge, where family gathers, where love is shared. There, beneath the surface, the truth waits." Rebecca read it 3 times. The heart of the home, where warmth and light converge, where family gathers. She thought about the house, about where they spent their time. The den? No, that was new. A room she'd chosen, not one Edward would have known. The dining room? Possibly, but they'd never used it. The kitchen? She went downstairs, moving quietly, so she wouldn't wake the kids. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a large room with an old cast-iron stove, a massive fireplace, and a long wooden table. This was where Victorian families would have gathered, where meals were prepared, where warmth came from the fire. She looked around, running her hands along the walls, tapping on panels. Nothing sounded hollow. She checked the cabinets, the floor, the ceiling. Nothing. Then, she looked at the fireplace. It was huge, big enough to stand in, with a hearth made of worn brick and a mantel carved from dark wood. She knelt down and examined the bricks. Most were standard, but a few, near the back, looked different, slightly smaller, slightly darker. She pressed on them. One shifted. Her heart leapt. She pressed harder, and the brick slid backward into the wall. Behind it was darkness. She grabbed her phone and shined the light inside. There was a space back there, maybe 3 feet deep, running the width of the fireplace, and inside that space were wooden crates. She reached in and pulled one out. It was heavy, sealed with old nails. She found a screwdriver and carefully pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were more paintings, smaller ones this time, but just as detailed, just as beautiful. She counted them. 11. The missing pieces, the heart of the collection. Rebecca sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by 120 years of hidden history, and she started to laugh. Not from joy, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. She'd been homeless 3 months ago, living in a car with 3 kids and $400 to her name. And now she was sitting in a condemned mansion, with art worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. The next morning, Diane returned with 2 other people. One was a lawyer named Martin Reese, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a briefcase that looked like it cost more than Rebecca's car. The other was Dr. Helen Travers, an art historian and appraiser who specialized in American Impressionism. Rebecca showed them everything: the paintings, the journal, the hidden compartments, the letters. Dr. Travers examined each piece with gloves and a magnifying glass, taking notes, photographing every detail. She worked in silence for 3 hours. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "This is the most significant art discovery of the century," she said. "Maybe longer. These pieces have been lost since the 1890s. Museums have empty spaces on their walls where these paintings are supposed to hang. Collectors have been searching for them for generations. And you found them in your fireplace." She looked at Rebecca with something close to awe. "Do you understand what you have?" Diane said. "Maybe 200 million, Rebecca said quietly. Dr. Travers shook her head. "That was before we found the last 11. With all 42 pieces authenticated, and assuming my preliminary assessments are correct, you're looking at closer to $256 million. The number hung in the air like something physical. $256 million. Martin, the lawyer, cleared his throat. "Which brings us to the legal situation. Technically, you own this house and everything in it. You purchased the property at a legal auction. The previous owner forfeited all rights when they failed to pay taxes. However, there will be challenges." "What kind of challenges?" Rebecca asked. "The state may argue that the collection is a cultural treasure and should be in a museum. Descendants of Edward Whitmore, if any exist, may make a claim. The auction company may argue they weren't aware of the true value of the property, though that claim is weak. And then there's the IRS. Found property is taxable income. At this valuation, you're looking at a tax bill somewhere in the range of $90 million. Rebecca felt sick. "I don't have $90 million. No, but you have $256 million in assets. The paintings can be sold or auctioned to cover the taxes. The question is, what do you want to do with them?" Rebecca looked around the kitchen, at the house she'd been fighting to save, at the walls that had protected this secret for over a century. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then you need to figure it out," Martin said, "because in about 48 hours, we're going to file documentation with the state, and the moment we do, this becomes public. And when it does, Your life as you know it ends. What happens next will turn this discovery upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. Rebecca woke up to find 3 news vans parked outside the house, and reporters already setting up cameras on the sidewalk. Martin had warned her this would happen, but seeing it was different. She kept the kids home from school, afraid to let them out the door. By noon, the story was everywhere. Homeless mother discovers lost art collection, worth hundreds of millions. Victorian mansion yields priceless treasure. Single mom strikes gold in condemned house. The headlines were sensational, reductive, turning her life into a fairy tale. But it didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like a siege. Reporters knocked on the door constantly. Helicopters circled overhead. Neighbors she'd never met gave interviews about her, making up stories, speculating about her motives. The grocery store clerk, who'd barely looked at her 2 weeks ago, told a camera crew that she'd always seemed suspicious. The school receptionist said she'd known something was off about that house. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. And everyone wanted a piece of what she'd found. The legal challenges started immediately. A man claiming to be Edward Whitmore's great-great-grandson filed a lawsuit demanding the collection. The lawsuit was dismissed within a week, when it turned out he wasn't related at all, but 3 more appeared to take its place. The state of Pennsylvania filed a motion arguing that the collection should be declared a state treasure and placed in a museum. 2 auction houses sent representatives offering to handle the sale, each one promising a better deal than the last. And Richard Dalton, predictably, filed a claim saying Rebecca had misrepresented the property's value during the purchase and demanding compensation. Martin fought every claim, his team of lawyers working around the clock. But the stress was destroying Rebecca. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. Every time her phone rang, it was another reporter, another lawyer, another person wanting something from her. The house that had felt like a refuge now felt like a prison. Michael started having nightmares. Sophie stopped talking at school. Emma's cough came back, worse than before. They were trapped, all 4 of them, caught in a storm they never asked for. One night, Rebecca sat in the library with Diane, who'd become something close to a friend over the past few weeks. "I don't know if I can do this," Rebecca admitted. "Yes, you can," Diane said. "You can because you have to, because those kids need you to. They need a mother, not a circus act. Then be a mother. Fight for them. Fight for what you found. Don't let these people take it from you." Rebecca looked at the paintings, still stored in the den, each one worth more money than she could comprehend. "What if I don't want it?" she asked. "What if I just want to go back to being nobody?" "You can't," Diane said gently, "because you're not nobody. You never were. You're the woman who bought a condemned house to give her kids a home. You're the woman who found a lost piece of history, and you're the woman who's going to decide what happens to it. Not the state, not some fake descendant. You." The authentication process took 6 weeks. Dr. Travers brought in experts from across the country, each one examining the paintings, verifying signatures, checking provenance against historical records. Every piece passed. Every single one. 42 paintings by some of the most important American artists of the 19th century. Mary Cassatt, Childe Hassam, William Merritt Chase, John Singer Sargent, James McNeill Whistler, Winslow Homer, names Rebecca had never heard of, but that made art historians weep. The final appraisal came back at $256,400,000. Martin sat her down in the library, now converted into a makeshift office, and walked her through the numbers. "After taxes, legal fees, and authentication costs, you're looking at approximately $140 million net," he said. "That assumes you sell the entire collection at auction, which, I recommend. Keeping them would require security, insurance, climate control, all of which costs millions annually. And if I donate them? Rebecca asked. To a museum? Martin nodded. You'd get a substantial tax deduction, probably enough to offset most of the tax burden. You'd still have to pay some, but nowhere near 90 million. The museum would take possession, display the collection, and you'd be named as the donor. Your kids would grow up seeing plaques with your name on them. Rebecca thought about that. Thought about walking into a museum. Someday with Michael, Sophie, and Emma, showing them the paintings that had changed their lives. But you'd be giving up a fortune, Martin added. $140 million could set your family up for generations. Your kids could go to any college, you could live anywhere, do anything. You'd never have to worry about money again. I've never had money, Rebecca said. I don't know if I'd know what to do with that much. Then, hire people who do. Financial advisors, accountants, trustees. It's not as complicated as it sounds, but it was complicated. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about what Edward Whitmore had wanted, what Margaret had protected, what this house had been built to hide. Rebecca spent the next week reading through every letter, every journal entry, trying to understand the man who'd created this mystery. And in one of the final entries, dated November 2nd, 1898, she found something that changed everything. I do not know who will find this collection, Edward wrote. Perhaps no one. Perhaps it will remain hidden until the house itself crumbles to dust. But if someone does find it, I hope they understand its purpose. These paintings are not merely objects of beauty or wealth. They are proof that beauty can endure, that creativity cannot be destroyed, that art transcends the moment of its creation and speaks across generations. I have spent my life collecting them not for profit but for preservation, and I pray that whoever discovers them does the same, not for personal gain, but for the betterment of all who come after. For art belongs not to individuals, but to humanity itself. Rebecca read it twice, then closed the journal and made her decision. 3 months after the discovery, Rebecca stood on the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, in front of a crowd of journalists, museum officials, art historians, and donors. Beside her were Michael, Sophie, and Emma, dressed in new clothes but still looking uncomfortable in the spotlight. Behind her, museum director Christina Walsh waited patiently. Rebecca stepped up to the microphone, her hands shaking. She'd never been good at public speaking, had spent most of her life trying to be invisible, but not anymore. My name is Rebecca Monroe, she began. 4 months ago, I was living in my car with my 3 children. I was homeless, desperate, and out of options. I bought a condemned house for $950 because it was the only thing I could afford. And inside that house, I found something extraordinary. She paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. A lot of people have asked me what I'm going to do with the Whitmore collection, and I've spent a long time thinking about it, thinking about what it means, what it's worth, what I should do. But the truth is, it was never really mine to keep. Edward Whitmore didn't hide those paintings for someone to get rich. He hid them so they'd survive, so they'd be protected. And now that they have been, it's time to share them with the world. She turned to Christina Walsh. I'm donating the entire collection to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, with the condition that it be kept together, displayed as the Whitmore collection, and made accessible to the public free of charge 1 day a week. I want kids like mine, kids who've never been to a museum, kids who don't think art is for people like them, to be able to see it. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Rebecca wasn't done. I'm also establishing a foundation with part of the tax deduction, she continued. The Whitmore Foundation will provide housing assistance and job training for homeless families, because I know what it's like to have nothing, and I know what one chance can mean. She looked down at her kids. Michael was crying. Sophie was holding his hand. Emma was smiling, small and proud. "This collection is worth $256 million, Rebecca said. "But the house that protected it, the house that gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to go, that's priceless. And I'm going to restore it. Every room, every window, every inch. And when it's done, it's going to be a home. Not just for us, but for the next person who needs one. A place where people can rebuild their lives, just like I'm rebuilding mine." The applause was deafening. Rebecca stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed, exhausted, relieved. It was done. The decision was made. The collection would be preserved. Her family would be okay. And the house, the beautiful, broken, mysterious house that had changed everything, would finally get the restoration it deserved. But as she walked down the museum steps, hand in hand with her children, she noticed someone standing at the edge of the crowd. Richard Dalton. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. And when their eyes met, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing one, a patient one. The kind of smile that said, "This isn't over." Rebecca's blood ran cold, because she suddenly realized something. She'd found 42 paintings, but what if there were more? What if Edward Whitmore had hidden something else, something Richard Dalton knew about, something he was still waiting to find? She looked back at the museum, at the reporters, at the officials celebrating her donation, and she understood. The discovery had made her famous, but fame came with a price. Now everyone knew where she lived, everyone knew about the house, and everyone would be watching, waiting, searching. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The weeks following the museum announcement felt like living in two worlds at once. In one world, Rebecca was a national news story, the homeless single mother who'd struck gold, the woman everyone wanted to interview, photograph, and celebrate. In the other world, she was still just a mom trying to get her kids to eat their vegetables and finish their homework on time. The tension between those two realities was exhausting. But slowly, carefully, things began to change. The legal challenges that had seemed insurmountable started to crumble. Martin and his team dismantled each claim methodically. The fake descendants were exposed. The state's motion to seize the collection as a cultural treasure was withdrawn after Rebecca's public donation announcement. Richard Dalton's lawsuit alleging misrepresentation collapsed when the judge ruled that the property had been sold as is at a legitimate public auction, and no fraud had occurred. One by one, the threats disappeared. But Richard Dalton himself did not. Rebecca saw him twice more in the following weeks. Once, driving slowly past the house in his black sedan, his eyes scanning the windows like he was memorizing every detail. And once at the hardware store in town, standing in the back aisle, watching her shop. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just watched. And that somehow felt worse than any threat he could have made. She mentioned it to Martin, who promised to look into it. But there was nothing illegal about a man driving on public streets or shopping in a store. Unless he made an explicit threat or trespassed, there was nothing anyone could do. So Rebecca did what she'd learned to do over the past 4 months. She kept moving forward. The tax situation was resolved faster than expected. The donation of the collection to the museum generated a charitable deduction that offset most of the tax burden, and the remaining amount was manageable when structured as a payment plan. Martin's team negotiated with the IRS, and within 6 weeks, everything was finalized. Rebecca would owe taxes. Yes, but spread over 10 years. The payments were something she could handle, especially with the foundation money and the book deal that had come out of nowhere. A publisher in New York had reached out through Martin, offering a substantial advance for Rebecca to write her story. She'd laughed at first, thinking they had the wrong person. She wasn't a writer. But the publisher explained they'd pair her with a ghostwriter, someone who could help her tell the story in her own voice. The advance was $250,000, More money than Rebecca had ever imagined having. She'd signed the contract 2 weeks ago, and the ghostwriter, a kind woman named Allison, had already started conducting interviews. The book was scheduled to release the following year. With the advance money, Rebecca hired Tom full-time to manage the restoration of the house. He brought in a crew of local workers, men and women who needed the jobs, and together they began the real work of bringing the mansion back to life. The roof was replaced first, a massive undertaking that took 3 weeks and required a crane to lift the materials. Then came the foundation repairs, the electrical rewiring, the plumbing overhaul. Each project revealed new challenges, but also new discoveries. They found more hidden compartments, though none contained art. Instead, they found pieces of the Whitmore family's life. Children's toys, old photographs, letters between Edward and Margaret that revealed a marriage built on deep affection and shared dreams. Rebecca read every letter, feeling like she was getting to know the people who'd built this place, and in knowing them, understanding what they'd wanted it to become. One letter in particular stayed with her. It was from Margaret to Edward, dated December 5, 1895. "My dearest Edward," it read, "you ask me if I fear what we are doing, hiding such treasures away where no one can see them. I do not fear it. I believe in it. For what is the purpose of beauty if not to endure? What is the purpose of creation if not to outlast the Creator? These paintings will survive us. They will survive our children and our children's children. And one day, when the world is ready, they will be found by someone who understands their value not in gold, but in what they represent: hope, resilience, the belief that even in darkness, beauty persists. That is worth protecting. That is worth everything." Rebecca hung that letter in a frame in the library, where she could see it every day. It reminded her why she'd made the choice she did, why she'd given the collection away instead of selling it. Because Margaret was right. Some things were worth more than money. By late February, 5 months after she'd first bought the house, the transformation was undeniable. The exterior had been repainted in historically accurate colors: deep burgundy with cream trim and hunter green accents. The porch was rebuilt, solid and safe, with new railings and a swing that Sophie claimed immediately. The windows were replaced with custom reproductions that matched the originals. The roof no longer sagged. The yard was cleared, revealing stone pathways and the remnants of gardens that Tom's wife, Linda, had volunteered to restore. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. The grand staircase had been repaired and refinished, the wood glowing like honey in the afternoon light. The chandelier in the entryway was rewired and cleaned, its crystals sparkling. The fireplaces were inspected and certified safe. The floors were sanded and sealed. The walls were replastered and painted. Room by room, the house came back to life. And as it did, something unexpected happened. The town started to take pride in it. People Rebecca had never met stopped by to see the progress. They brought casseroles, offers of help, old photographs of the house from decades past. The local historical society reached out, asking if they could include the house on their annual heritage tour. The high school art teacher asked if she could bring her students to see where the Whitmore collection had been discovered. Slowly, the judgment and suspicion that had followed Rebecca in those early weeks transformed into something else: respect, admiration, community. She'd proven herself, not by getting rich, though people knew she could have, but by choosing something harder, by choosing to give back. Lorraine, the woman who'd brought the first casserole, became a regular presence at the house. She helped Rebecca set up the foundation, connecting her with local organizations that worked with homeless families, and introducing her to people who could help make the vision real. By March, the Whitmore Foundation was officially operational, with an office in downtown Ashford and a staff of 3. Their first project was converting an old apartment building into transitional housing for families in crisis. 12 units, fully furnished, with on-site childcare and job training programs. Rebecca visited the site every week, watching the renovations, talking to the families who'd be moving in. She saw herself in every mother's face, heard her own fear and hope in their voices. This was why she'd made the choice she did. This was what the collection was meant to do. In April, the Philadelphia Museum of Art held the official unveiling of the Whitmore collection. Rebecca attended with her children, all of them dressed in clothes that actually fit, standing in front of a room full of people who'd come to see the paintings she'd found in the walls of her house. The gallery was stunning. The museum had designed a dedicated space for the collection, with warm lighting and deep blue walls that made the colors in the paintings sing. Each piece was labeled with its title, artist, date, and a small plaque that read, "The Whitmore Collection, discovered and donated by Rebecca Monroe." Christina Walsh gave a speech about the historical significance of the find, about how these paintings filled gaps in the understanding of American Impressionism, about how they'd been thought lost forever. Then she invited Rebecca to say a few words. Rebecca hadn't prepared anything. She'd been too nervous. But she walked up to the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and spoke from the heart. "I didn't know anything about art when I found these paintings," she said. "I still don't. Not really. But I know what it's like to feel lost. To feel like you don't belong anywhere. To feel like the world has forgotten you." She paused, her voice catching. These paintings were forgotten for over 100 years, hidden away, waiting for someone to find them. And I think that's what Edward Whitmore wanted. He wanted them to be found by someone who understood what it meant to be forgotten. Someone who'd see them not as objects to own, but as proof that beautiful things can survive, even when everything around them falls apart. She looked at her kids, standing near the front, Michael holding Emma's hand. "I've been asked 100 times why I gave these away, why I didn't keep them, sell them, use the money to make my life easier. And the answer is simple. Because my life isn't just about me anymore. It's about what I can give to my kids and to other families like mine. It's about making sure that the next person who's sleeping in their car with their children has a place to go, a chance to rebuild, a reason to hope." The applause was thunderous. People stood, some were crying. Rebecca stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed, and Christina Walsh pulled her into a hug. "You did something extraordinary," Christina whispered. "Not just finding the collection, but understanding what to do with it." That night, after they got home, Rebecca tucked the kids into their beds, real beds now, in rooms that were theirs, in a house that was safe and warm and whole. Emma's room was in the left tower, just like Rebecca had promised, with the round window that looked out over the town. Sophie's room was next to it, painted lavender, with bookshelves Tom had built into the walls. Michael had claimed one of the larger rooms on the second floor, with space for a desk where he did his homework and a window seat where he read. Rebecca stood in the 5 hallway, looking at their closed doors, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. They were okay. They were more than okay. They were home. But as she walked downstairs, she saw something that made her stop. Through the window in the front door, she could see a car parked across the street. A black sedan. Richard Dalton. He was still watching, still waiting. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool, smelling of spring and fresh paint. She crossed her arms and stared at the car. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the driver's side door opened, and Richard Dalton stepped out. He didn't come closer, just stood beside his car, looking at the house. "It's beautiful," he called out. "You've done remarkable work. What do you want?" Rebecca asked, her voice steady. "To talk. We have nothing to talk about." "I think we do." He took a step forward. "You found 42 paintings. Congratulations. But Edward Whitmore was a very wealthy man, Rebecca. Very careful, very deliberate. Do you really think 42 paintings were all he hid? Rebecca's heart began to pound. If there was anything else, I would have found it. Would you? Richard smiled. You found the compartments he wanted you to find, the ones with clues, the ones meant to be discovered. But what about the things he never wanted discovered? The things he hid so well that only someone who knew the family, who studied the history, who understood the real story, could find them. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the reason I've wanted this house for 20 years, the reason I've been patient, the reason I'm still here. He took another step. There's more, Rebecca, hidden deeper than anything you found, and I know where it is. Rebecca forced herself to stay calm. Then why haven't you found it yourself? Because I needed someone to buy the house, someone to start the restoration, someone to make enough noise that the Historical Society would open their archives. Someone like you. He gestured to the house. You've done all the hard work. You've made the house safe. You've documented everything. And now, the final piece is within reach. Get off my property, Rebecca said, her voice like ice. Richard raised his hands. I'm not threatening you. I'm offering you a partnership. Help me find what's left, and I'll split it with you. 50-50. Whatever it is, whatever it's worth, we share it. I don't want your partnership. I want you to leave. Think about your kids, Rebecca. Think about what you could do with more money, more security, more. My kids are fine. We're fine. And whatever you think is hidden here, it's not yours. Richard's smile faded. You're making a mistake. No, Rebecca said. I made a mistake 5 months ago when I didn't call the police the first time. You showed up here making threats. I'm not making that mistake again. If I see you near this house, near my children, or anywhere near me, I'm filing a restraining order. And if you set foot on this property, I'm calling the police. Are we clear? For a moment, Richard just stared at her. Then he nodded slowly. Clear. He got back in his car and drove away. Rebecca stood on the porch, watching the taillights disappear, her hands shaking. She didn't know if Richard Dalton was bluffing or if there really was something else hidden in the house. And honestly, she didn't care. She'd found what she was meant to find. She'd done what she was meant to do. Whatever else was buried here, if anything, could stay buried. The next morning, she called Martin and told him about the encounter. He promised to look into getting a restraining order and to have someone run a deeper background check on Dalton. Do you think he's right? Martin asked. Do you think there's more? Rebecca looked around the library, at the house that had already given her so much. I don't know. Maybe. But it doesn't matter. This house isn't about treasure hunting anymore. It's about building a life. Good answer, Martin said. Spring turned to summer. The gardens Linda had planted began to bloom, filling the yard with color. The Whitmore Foundation opened its first transitional housing facility, and 12 families moved in. Rebecca attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, watching mothers cry with relief as they received their keys, seeing children run through the apartments with the same wild hope her own kids had felt when they first had a safe place to sleep. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the foundation and the impact it was already having. Donations started coming in from people across the state, people who'd heard Rebecca's story and wanted to help. The foundation grew, adding a second building, then a third. Within a year, they were helping over 50 families, providing not just housing but job training, childcare, counseling, and a pathway out of the cycle of homelessness. Rebecca hired a full-time director to run the operations, a woman named Patricia, who'd once been homeless herself and understood exactly what these families needed. But Rebecca stayed involved, visiting the facilities weekly, talking to the families, listening to their stories. Each one reminded her of where she'd been. Each one reminded her why this mattered. The book was published in October, a year after she'd bought the house. Hidden Treasures, a story of hope, art, and second chances, debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. Rebecca did a small book tour, traveling to Philadelphia, Boston, and New York, reading passages to audiences who hung on every word. At every event, people came up to her afterward with their own stories of hardship, of struggle, of survival. They thanked her for sharing her story. They told her she'd given them hope. And Rebecca, who'd spent most of her life feeling invisible, finally understood that her story mattered, not because she'd found millions of dollars in paintings, but because she'd found the courage to keep going when everything seemed impossible. Because she'd chosen to help others instead of just helping herself. Because she'd proven that second chances were real, and that sometimes the most broken things could be made beautiful again. By the time the first anniversary of the house purchase arrived, the transformation was complete. The mansion stood proud and restored, a landmark in Ashford, a symbol of what was possible when you refused to give up. Rebecca hosted a community celebration in the yard, inviting everyone who'd helped along the way. Tom and his crew, Lorraine and the church volunteers, the families from the foundation, the museum staff, the lawyers and accountants and advisors who'd made it all possible. Even Patricia, the librarian, who'd slipped Rebecca that first envelope of cash when everything seemed hopeless. They gathered under white tents as the sun set, eating food from local restaurants who'd donated catering, listening to music from the high school band, celebrating not just the house, but what it represented: community, resilience, hope. Rebecca stood on the porch with her children, looking out at the crowd. "You did good, Mom," Michael said, now 10 years old and almost as tall as her shoulder. "We did good," Rebecca corrected. "All of us." That night, after everyone had gone home, Rebecca walked through the quiet house one more time. She ran her hands along the smooth banister, admired the gleaming floors, stood in each doorway remembering what it had looked like a year ago. Broken, dangerous, impossible. And yet, here it was, whole. She ended in the library, where Edward Whitmore's journal sat on a shelf, preserved now in a glass case. She opened the case and carefully turned to the last page, reading the final entry one more time. "I do not know who will find this collection. Perhaps no one. But if someone does, I hope they understand that the greatest treasures are not the ones we keep, but the ones we share. Not the ones we hide, but the ones we reveal. Not the ones we own, but the ones we protect for future generations." May this house stand as a testament to that truth. And may whoever lives here understand that they are not just inheritors of stone and wood and art, but guardians of a legacy that transcends any single life. Rebecca closed the journal and smiled. "I understand, Edward," she whispered. "I understand." The months that followed brought changes Rebecca hadn't anticipated. The foundation's success attracted attention from state officials, who reached out about expanding the program to other cities. Rebecca found herself in meetings with legislators, non-profit leaders, and housing advocates, discussing policy and funding and scalability. She'd never imagined herself in rooms like that, but she discovered she had a voice that people listened to, not because she had credentials or degrees, but because she'd lived the experience. She knew what homeless families needed because she'd been one. And that knowledge, that authenticity, carried weight. By the second year, the Whitmore Foundation was operating in 3 cities across Pennsylvania, helping over 100 families transition out of homelessness. Rebecca had hired a full staff, including case managers, counselors, and job placement specialists. The organization had grown beyond anything she'd imagined, but she made sure to keep it grounded in the values that had started it. Every family that came through the program was treated with dignity. Every mother was reminded that her circumstances didn't define her worth. Every child was given the message that they deserved a safe place to call home. The house itself became more than just Rebecca's home. She opened the first floor to the public twice a month, offering free tours that told the story of Edward and Margaret Whitmore, the lost art collection, and the restoration process. Local schools brought field trips. History buffs drove from hours away, and every visitor left with the same message: beauty can survive even the darkest times, and second chances are possible if you're brave enough to take them. Michael thrived in his new environment. He'd always been a serious kid, carrying responsibilities too heavy for his age, but now he was starting to relax. He joined the school robotics team and made friends who came over to work on projects in the library. He talked about college, about becoming an engineer or an architect, about building things that would last. Sophie discovered a love of gardening that surprised everyone. She spent hours in the yard with Linda, learning the names of plants, understanding soil composition, planning what to plant each season. The gardens became her sanctuary, a place where she could be quiet and focused and entirely herself. The local garden club asked her to give a presentation about the restoration of the Victorian gardens, and she stood in front of 30 adults at age 11 and taught them about heritage roses with a confidence that made Rebecca's heart swell. Emma, the youngest, remained the dreamer. She filled notebooks with drawings, painted on canvases Tom built for her, and spent hours in the museum's gallery staring at the paintings her mother had found. She told anyone who would listen that she was going to be an artist someday, and no one doubted her. 2 years after buying the house, Rebecca received a call from Martin. "There's someone who wants to meet you," he said. "Who?" "His name is James Whitmore. He's Edward and Margaret's great-great-grandson. He lives in Oregon," saw the news coverage, and reached out to my office. "He's not contesting anything. He just wants to talk." Rebecca agreed to meet him, curious about the man whose ancestors had created the mystery she'd solved. James Whitmore arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late autumn. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and Margaret's eyes. Rebecca recognized them from the photographs she'd found. He stood on the porch, looking at the house, with an expression of wonder and grief. "It's been in my family for 4 generations, he said quietly, "but I've never seen it. My father refused to come back here after his mother died. Said the place held too many painful memories." Rebecca invited him inside. They walked through the rooms slowly, James stopping frequently to touch the woodwork, to examine the carvings, to stand in doorways and remember stories his grandmother had told him. "She used to talk about the paintings," he said, "about how her grandfather had hidden them to protect them. But by the time I was born, everyone thought it was just a family legend, something that had been lost or sold or never existed at all." "It existed," Rebecca said. "Your family protected something extraordinary." "No," James said, turning to look at her. "You protected it. You could have sold everything, walked away with a bow, fortune, and no one would have blamed you. But you didn't. You understood what my great-great-grandparents wanted, what they believed in." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I brought you something. It's a letter from Margaret to her daughter, written near the end of her life. I found it in my father's papers after he passed. I think you should have it." Rebecca opened the envelope carefully and read the letter, dated March 19th, 1932. "My dearest Catherine," it began, "I am old now, and my time grows short. But I want you to know the truth about the paintings your father hid so many years ago. He did not hide them out of greed or fear of losing them. He hid them because he believed that someday, when the world had changed, when people understood the value of beauty and preservation over possession and profit, someone would find them, someone worthy, someone who would understand that these paintings were never meant to belong to one family. They were meant to belong to everyone. I know you think him foolish for not selling them, for not using the money to make our lives easier, but he was right to do what he did. Some things are worth more than money. Some things are worth protecting even at great cost. And I hope that whoever finds what we have hidden understands this truth. I hope they are brave enough to share what they discover. I hope they prove your father's faith in humanity was justified. With all my love, your mother." Rebecca's hands trembled as she finished reading. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew someone would find them. And she hoped that person would be like you," James said. "Someone who understood." He looked around the restored library, at the house his ancestors had built, and lost, and dreamed about. "Thank you for proving her right." 3 years after buying the house, Rebecca stood in the library with a small group of people gathered around her. Diane was there, along with Dr. Travers, Christina, Walsh from the museum, Martin, Tom, and Linda, Lorraine, and Patricia from the foundation. James Whitmore had flown back from Oregon for the occasion. And standing beside Rebecca were Michael, Sophie, and Emma, now 12, 10, and 8 years old. On the wall hung a new plaque, commissioned by the Historical Society and the museum. It read, "The Whitmore House, built 1873 by Edward and Margaret Whitmore, home of the Whitmore Collection, discovered and donated by Rebecca Monroe, 2024. Restored through community support, and dedicated to the belief that beauty endures, hope persists, and second chances transform lives." Christina stepped forward to speak. "This house represents something rare in our world. It represents the idea that what we choose to do with what we're given defines us more than what we're given itself." Rebecca Monroe was given a condemned building and a mystery. She could have walked away. She could have sold everything for personal gain. Instead, she chose to restore, to preserve, and to give back. And in doing so, she's created something far more valuable than any art collection. She's created a legacy of hope. The small crowd applauded. Rebecca stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. "I want to thank everyone here," she said. "Everyone who helped us when we had nothing. Everyone who believed in this house when it seemed impossible. Everyone who understood that sometimes the most broken things are worth saving." She looked at her children. 3 years ago, we were living in a car. We had nowhere to go and no idea how we'd survive. But we took a chance on this house, and it gave us more than shelter. It gave us purpose. It gave us community. It gave us a future. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Edward and Margaret Whitmore built this house as a home. Then they turned it into a hiding place, protecting something they believed was worth more than their own comfort. And now, all these years later, we're turning it into something else, something they would have loved, a place where broken things are made whole, where people who've lost everything can find hope, where beauty and purpose and community come together. She gestured to the plaque. "This house isn't mine. It never was. It belongs to everyone who's ever needed a second chance. Everyone who's ever believed that tomorrow could be better than today. Everyone who understands that the greatest treasures aren't the ones we keep, but the ones we share." The next day, Rebecca received official word that the Whitmore House had been designated a National Historic Landmark. The designation came with grant money for ongoing preservation and recognition as a site of cultural significance. But more than that, it came with a promise. The house would be protected, its story would be told, and future generations would learn about Edward and Margaret Whitmore, about the collection they hid, and about the homeless single mother who found it and chose to give it away. Media requests continued to come in, but Rebecca had learned to be selective. She agreed to interviews that focused on the foundation's work and the importance of supporting homeless families. She declined the reality show offers, the book sequels about her personal life, and anything that felt exploitative. She'd become protective of her story, understanding that it wasn't just entertainment. It was real, it had meaning, and she had a responsibility to tell it in a way that honored that meaning. By the 4th year, the foundation had helped over 300 families. The success rate was remarkable. 82% of families who completed the program remained stably housed 2 years later. Other organizations started reaching out, wanting to replicate the model. Rebecca worked with researchers to document what worked and why, turning her instincts and experience into a framework others could use. The foundation secured major grants from philanthropic organizations impressed by the outcomes. They expanded to 5 cities, then 7. Rebecca hired regional directors and built a national board. The organization had grown beyond anything she'd imagined, but it stayed true to its mission. Every family received individualized support. Every child had access to educational resources. Every mother was treated with respect and given the tools to build a stable future. Michael graduated from middle school at the top of his class and enrolled in a private high school on a full scholarship. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man, still serious but with a quiet confidence that came from watching his mother build something from nothing. He told Rebecca he wanted to study urban planning and design affordable housing. "I want to build places like what you created," he said, "places where families can start over." Sophie had become a local celebrity in her own right. At 13, she'd written a book about Victorian gardens and historic preservation, illustrated with her own photographs and drawings. The local historical society published it, and it sold out 3 printings. She gave workshops at the library, teaching people about native plants and sustainable gardening. And she'd started a program bringing kids from the foundation's housing facilities to the Whitmore House Gardens, teaching them how to grow their own food. Emma, at 11, had already had her first art show. Tom had converted one of the carriage houses into a studio for her, and she spent hours there painting, drawing, sculpting. Her work was raw and emotional, reflecting both the trauma of their homeless years and the joy of stability. A local gallery had displayed some of her pieces, and 3 had sold, with Emma insisting the money go to the foundation. "Other kids need help more than I need art supplies," she'd said. 5 years after buying the house for $950, Rebecca stood in the master bedroom, looking out the window at Ashford below. The town had changed too. The downtown that had been half empty was now thriving. New businesses had opened. Young families were moving in. The factory that had closed decades ago had been converted into artist studios and small tech companies. People said the Whitmore House had put Ashford on the map, had reminded people that small towns could matter, that history could be preserved, that communities could come back from the edge. Rebecca didn't know if that was true. She suspected Ashford's resurgence had as much to do with larger economic forces and the tireless work of the mayor and town council. But if the house had played a role, even a small one, she was proud of that. She heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to find James Whitmore standing in the doorway. He'd become a regular visitor, traveling from Oregon 3 or 4 times a year to see the house and spend time with Rebecca and the kids. "I have news," he said, his expression serious. Rebecca's stomach tightened. "What kind of news?" "I've been going through more family papers. My aunt passed away last year, and I inherited boxes of documents from her estate. Most of it was routine, old tax records, deeds, letters. But I found something I think you need to see." He pulled out a leather folder, aged and worn. Inside was a document, handwritten, dated August 3rd, 1928. Rebecca recognized Edward Whitmore's handwriting. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a codicil to his will, an addition made near the end of his life. Listen to this." James read aloud. "In the event that the collection hidden within the Whitmore house is discovered and claimed, I direct that the finder be recognized not as a lucky treasure hunter, but as the rightful guardian of a legacy I have protected. Furthermore, I direct that any living descendants of my line support said guardian in whatever manner they see fit, for they have proven themselves worthy of the prior trust I have placed in the future. And finally, I direct that the house itself, should it still stand, be preserved in perpetuity as a monument to the belief that beauty and hope can survive any darkness." James looked up, He anticipated this. All of it. He knew someday someone would find the paintings, and he wanted to make sure that person was protected and supported. Rebecca sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Why didn't this surface during the legal challenges? Because it was never filed with his official will. It was a private document kept by the family. I only found it by accident. But it's signed and witnessed. And more importantly, it expresses his clear intent. James sat down across from her. What I'm trying to say, Rebecca, is that Edward Whitmore wanted this to happen exactly the way it did. He wanted someone like you to find the collection. Someone who would understand its true value. Someone who would choose preservation over profit. And I want you to know that I support every decision you've made. My great-great-grandfather would be proud of you. Rebecca felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I was so afraid I was doing the wrong thing. Afraid I was being stupid for giving away a fortune. Afraid people would think I was crazy. You weren't crazy. You were exactly what he hoped for. What Margaret hoped for. What this house needed. That evening, Rebecca gathered her children in the library and told them about the codicil, about Edward's final wishes, about the validation of everything they'd been through. Does this mean we did the right thing? Sophie asked. It means we did exactly what we were supposed to do, Rebecca said. Even when it was hard, even when we didn't know if it would work out, we trusted that doing good was more important than getting rich. And we were right. Michael looked around the library, at the house that had become their home, at the life they'd built. I'm proud of us, he said quietly. Me too, baby, Rebecca said. Me too. The years continued to pass. The foundation expanded to 12 cities and helped over 1,000 families. Rebecca was invited to the White House to receive a National Service Award. She gave a TED Talk that went viral, with over 10 million views. She was profiled in magazines, featured in documentaries, and held up as an example of what was possible when people chose compassion over greed. But through it all, she remained grounded. She still lived in the Whitmore house with her children. She still visited the foundation facilities weekly. She still answered emails from mothers asking for advice, for help, for hope, and she never forgot where she'd started. On the 10-year anniversary of buying the house, Rebecca organized a special event. She invited every family who'd been helped by the foundation, every volunteer who'd contributed time, every donor who'd given money, and every person who'd played a role in the journey. Over 500 people gathered in the yard of the Whitmore house under string lights and autumn stars. There were speeches and music and food. There were tears and laughter and stories shared. And at the end of the night, Rebecca stood on the porch with her children, Michael, now 20, in college studying architecture, Sophie, 17, planning to study environmental science, and Emma, 15, already committed to pursuing art, and looked out at the crowd. 10 years ago, she began, I spent my last $950 on a house everyone said was worthless. And in the walls of that house, I found $256 million in art. But that's not the real treasure I found. She gestured to the crowd. This is all of you. The community we built. The families we helped. The lives that changed. The belief that we can make the world a little bit better if we're willing to try. That's the treasure. That's what matters. She looked up at the house, at the windows glowing warm in the darkness. Edward and Margaret Whitmore built this house as a home. They filled it with beauty and protected it through darkness. And they trusted that someday, someone would understand what they'd done and carry it forward. I hope we've done that. I hope we've honored their trust. And I hope that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, this house is still standing as a reminder that second chances are real, that beauty endures, and that hope, no matter how fragile, never truly dies. The crowd erupted in applause. People stood, cheering, crying, celebrating not just what had been accomplished, but what was still to come. Because the work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be families who needed help, children who needed shelter, people who needed to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. And the Whitmore Foundation, born from a desperate gamble and a condemned Victorian mansion, would be there to help them. Rebecca Monroe had been homeless with 3 kids. She'd spent her last dollars on a house that should have killed her. She'd found a fortune and given it away. And in doing so, she'd built something more valuable than any amount of money. She'd built a legacy, a testament to courage, compassion, and the unshakable belief that broken things, houses, lives, dreams, could be made beautiful again. The house still stood, the foundation still thrived, and somewhere in the walls, in the wood and stone and history, Edward and Margaret Whitmore's dream lived on. Not in the paintings they'd hidden, but in the lives those paintings had changed. Not in the treasure itself, but in what the treasure had made possible. And that, Rebecca understood as she stood on the porch with her children beside her, and 500 grateful faces looking up at her, was the real miracle. Not the discovery, the decision, not what she'd found, what she'd chosen to do with it. Because at the end of the day, we're not defined by what we're given. We're defined by what we give back. And Rebecca Monroe, who'd started with nothing and found everything, had given back more than anyone could have imagined. The house lights glowed. The stars shone overhead. And the future, once so dark and uncertain, stretched out before them bright with possibility. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep driving with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe broken things still deserve to shine.